What is it like to debate pot legalization at the Turning Point USA conference? Should J.D. Vance be the future of the Republican Party? And just how big is the welfare fraud problem in Minnesota and maybe everywhere else? I'll listen more on today's show. Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine. I'm your host, Peter Suderman. And today I am joined by my colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Matt Welch, and special guest, Eric Boehm. Happy holidays, everybody. Woo.
Happy solstice,
so, okay, thank you, guys. So let's talk about Turning Point USA. The conference was this weekend, and our very own Katherine Mangu-Ward was there to debate marijuana legalization. And I think, Katherine, you won, right? There wasn't like a vote there in the stadium, but Donald Trump rescheduled pot this week, which makes legal weed an official MAGA priority, as far as I can tell, right? What was it like? Tell us.
I did not win. One thing that I can report to you from my time at the TPUSA conference is that they are all in on drug prohibition. Now, this is partially because the conference itself was this like combination political rally and like canonization of Charlie Kirk, who obviously was a hugely important figure and you know died since the last one, right? So it's still very fresh, And he was no fan of marijuana. He made that very clear. He was a big fan of debate, which is why I was there. So my understanding is that this was kind of like his dying wish. Like this was one of the last things that he was involved in was, we should have some debate. So there was one on drugs, there was one on Israel, there were some others. So I was there in the spirit of debate. And the audience was like, marijuana is a gateway drug and drugs are bad, the end. So I did not win, but I would like to think that I made some friends. Certainly every stoner at the TPUSA conference did seek me out afterward, and I appreciate
all three of them?
Every single one of you. There were more than three, Peter.
So you're telling me, right, Charlie Kirk wasn't a fan of marijuana, but he was a fan of debate. The audience there wasn't a fan of marijuana, but Turning Point USA is a Trumpy crowd. I don't know if it's quite the core of MAGA or whatever we want to call it, but that is a pro-Trump room. How did they feel about Trump rescheduling marijuana last week, given that they are generally just kind of in favor of stuff that Trump does?
Very disappointed. It was interesting. I got a lot of I love my president, but I think he made the wrong call on this one. That kind of thing. I wouldn't say there was like a predominant theory about why he had made this mistake, but very, very much the tone was like, well, you know, he's great, but you can't win them all.
Why do all of these Turning Point USA people hate our president? I don't understand.
Good question, Eric. And that is not one that I asked them. I mean, you know, I did say in my remarks, like, hey, I think Trump agrees with me and that feels relevant to y'all. And they were kind of like, it is not relevant. We do not like drugs.
I mean, I think there's an actual lesson there, which is that the kind of succession battles that we're seeing right now in the Trump or post-Trump Republican Party are ones in which he's not really central to it.
That's right.
And also, he's not going to be the target of criticism because he, unlike everybody else who's vying to succeed him, can say whatever he wants and change his mind on a dime about any number of issues like banning TikTok and AI regulation and crypto and marijuana and just you name it. And they're never going to really train their guns against him. They're going to instead fight each other like wolverines over who gets to inherit his fan base, which is interesting because none of them are going to be able to do it ultimately, which I think underlies this whole drama of this weekend.
Yeah.
You are obviously correct that the online right is having a cannibalized right, is just like eating its own, right? There's an Ouroboros situation happening with the online right now. At the same time, TPUSA is quite clearly lining up behind J.D. Vance to be the Trump successor. I mean, this is not something that you have to read into the tea leaves. This is explicit. And that's what's happening there. And it seems to me like nearly all of the factions of the right at this moment are basically okay with Trump being the successor. Like all of the major factions that I'm sorry, excuse me, with Vance being the successor to
Freudian slip there. They would all be very okay with Trump being the successor.
They would be okay with Trump being the successor, with Vance being Trump's successor here. And I wonder if that tells us anything, that on the one hand, there's a whole lot of infighting, and on the other hand, there's pretty clear line of succession. Matt?
Yes and no. Like by saying that kind of postpones the argument. He's going to be granted, I think, the nomination kind of by acclamation of Trumpy organizations. So that's going to be the Heritage Foundation. It's not going to be Mike Pence's outfit, which is basically gobbling up all of the aspects of the Heritage Foundation.
The new Heritage Foundation, yeah.
That have left. It's not going to be Rand Paul, who's been making sort of presidential-ish noises here. But the extent of MAGA wants to line up behind J.D. Vance because that is a kind of like show of unity. But Vance lacks Trump's magic power. Everybody does. He's a generational political talent. Love him or hate him or both. Vance is not. Vance is an interesting creature, to be sure, but he doesn't have that magical ability to have people follow him no matter what he says. So there's this attempt to, if we just give it all to Vance, somehow we're going to postpone these arguments. But then the arguments are absolutely happening like crazy right now. Now, Vance can say like, oh, I'm above it all. His speech at the end of a very contentious TPUSA conference was just like, I'm not here to draw any lines about who can't be inside the conservative movement. Come on, this is of course he wants to be the one to inherit it all, but that is not necessarily what he's going to get. He's not necessarily going to get Ben Shapiro's audience or whoever else's audience that have been critical of some of these compromises that the conservative movement has made. And by compromises, I mean hanging out with a bunch of incel Nazis.
Yeah. So on the subject of Rand Paul, since Matt mentioned, I want to ask you about that, Eric, because Rand Paul has been talking about how we shouldn't just anoint J.D. Vance as the Trump successor here. The quote is, I think there needs to be representatives in the Republican Party who still believe international trade is good, who still believe in free market capitalism, who still believe in low taxes. That sounds not so bad. I'm not sure it's going to happen, though. But this is, I guess, is my question, is it sort of seems like the Trump era has so degraded the Republican policy worldview, right? Like just the capacity to have a worldview, right? It seems like it doesn't believe anything outside of like what Trump tells them. Do you think there is any chance that we get what Rand Paul is hoping for here?
I mean, I guess I have to, right? Like I have to keep hope alive.
Yeah.
The rest of that line that you mentioned there, Peter, that was from Rand Paul was on ABC this weekend on Sunday, and he delivered that quote, and then the follow-up question from the host was, "And that's not J.D. Vance?" ? And Rand immediately just deadpanned no.
His head
like
explode.
One word answer, no, absolutely not. And yeah, like that's going to be one of the fights here. There's going to be a bunch of fights here as the right continues to crack up in the kind of Trump lame duck era. Like I would love to see a Rand Paul or a Rand Paul type figure emerge as a leader here. I don't know that I see an obvious path forward at the moment for that, but I hope that as the crack up continues and as the different factions on the right continue to kind of eat each other, maybe that creates an opportunity for a different type of candidate to emerge here. I think Vance is best not to be like real dark about this, but Vance's best shot, I think, is that Trump resigns or dies in office and he becomes president during this term. And then he would have all of the built-in advantages going into 28 of being the incumbent. If he's got to go as the sitting vice president in what may very well be a pretty unpopular administration coming off of a pretty hard shellacking in the midterms. All of those things may or may not happen. Who knows? Trump's approval ratings could turn around. Midterms, anything could still happen. But if the midterms don't go well, if Trump's approval rating continues to be bad, like Vance is kind of tied to Trump in a way that these other people are not. And I think you're already seeing, it started with Rand Paul, but you're already seeing some other Republicans starting to distance themselves from Trump on some key issues, some of which we'll talk about later today, I'm sure.
Well, the Republican base is tied to Trump, and that gives J.D. Vance an advantage, I think, at least in the primary, maybe not in the general election if Trump is unpopular or if the economy continues going this way. But Katherine, just sort of read that room for us. Like, give us the future of the Republican Party based on, I went to the TPUSA conference for 2 days.
Yeah, there's a reason I didn't write that article, and that's because those types of articles are bad. But I will do the 1 minute on the podcast version of it, which is the vibe was very, very similar to the heyday of CPAC. Like back in the kind of like late aughts when CPAC was like this whole thing, and like all these kids were there, and every organization was there, and everyone was just like kind of had this like combination like church revival kind of atmosphere, but also like there was less irony at TPUSA than there was at CPAC. Like CPAC always didn't totally take itself at face value, and the thing that was striking to me is like everyone who was there, not everyone, the general kind of zeitgeist of what was happening there was extremely sincere. It was this very sincere conflation of like Charlie Kirk and Jesus Christ and Donald Trump into this like single kind of GOP.
Is that the triune God?
Yeah,
as I understand.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, it was a lot. It really was there was a lot of fervor. I think that's the right word. And you could still see, first of all, there was the factional warfare, which, Ben Shapiro kicked off the conference. Lots of people have covered this by basically calling out, like making an enemies list, right? Starting with Candace Owens, who has been truly egregious for a long time now in her anti-Semitism, her conspiracy mongering, et cetera, but then kind of sliding down the scale to her apologists and other people sort of willing to be associated with her. It was basically the opener of the conference. And it was, at least to me, shocking. Maybe other people who watched the movement a little more closely understood that that was coming. But I assumed that this was going to be kumbaya on stage, knives backstage, and it was not. At the same time, you could see kind of these factions of kind of the keep your nose clean people, maybe, or something like that, versus the like loyalty people. You could also see the ancestral factions of conservatism still there. So there was still the homeschool moms, and there was still the like convention Barbie gals and their like, like nude heels, and there were still the like camel pants guys, and like there was the quarter zip dudes. Like I know I just described everyone by their clothes, and I'm so sorry, but it's this was like a thing that you have always been able to see on display at conservative events, and they were still all there. And then there was this layer on top of like Owens v. I don't even know who's on the other side at this point. Owens v. Shapiro, I guess. And then there was but who's the nominee? And everyone was like, oh, well, that's Vance. So it was a real layer cake.
All right, so you've got all these factions there, and the one question I have, since you're telling us that it is a throwback to how things used to be at CPAC in particular, is were there Ron Paul people there? Because that's the thing about CPAC that people forget, is that for years, the Ron Paul people showed up in force, and they kind of, sort of rigged the CPAC election so that Ron Paul always won. And I don't think that is happening, and I think that is a real difference.
I do fear that, it's certainly that is not happening with anybody libertarian adjacent, because I would have sniffed them out and they were not there. And so I think, instead what is happening is that whatever the fringe is that will eventually pull the party its way, it's not something that was visible or intelligible to me. And I fear, in the worst case, that it's the actual Nazis, right, that are sort of the fringe that's pulling the party their way. And there's some evidence that that is the case. If not actual Nazis, maybe, you could, for example, see trends among the young people that they were less pro-Israel, like things like that, which are not as dire.
Which doesn't make you a Nazi. We should clarify.
As I said, not as dire, but still a shift. Yeah. And also, of course, just the very, very strong kind of authoritarianism, which was shared with varying degrees of fervor across many of these factions.
Well, I think, too, when you have somebody like Vance, now, I wasn't there, but the one clip I saw of Vance speaking on stage, or one of several clips, was when he was talking about how this isn't the time for litmus tests, or this isn't the time for cutting people out. It's like, okay, not necessarily just J.D. Vance, but the entire faction of the Republican Party that he represents, from like Patrick Deneen all the way down that new right, intellectual movement, has made a very concerted and obvious and vocal attempt to drive libertarians and free marketers out of the Republican Party. And so for him to now stand on stage and say, whoa, hold on, we need to be a big tent, we have to let people in, like, you read between the lines there, it's those people that Katherine just talked about that he's saying we should let those people in. But like J.D. Vance has no problem kicking people out too. He's been doing it for years. And so that, the lack of the lack of the Ron Paul people there, I think, speaks volumes to what
good for them in one way, which is they did let Katherine in to make the right argument about pot. Let's smoke out another topic here. Speaking of the online right, The Department of Justice released thousands of Epstein-related documents last week in response to the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Trump was mentioned in a few of them. There were photos of Bill Clinton, which the White House tried to make some hay out of. But the documents were heavily redacted. And the authors of the law that required that release say this isn't enough. Members of Congress Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie co-sponsored that legislation, and they are now calling for Attorney General Pam Bondi to be held in inherent contempt, drafting a resolution that would fine her for every day the full files are not released. Matt, what do you make of all of this? The Thomas Massie aspect of it, the bipartisan sort of censure of Pam Bondi, just the continual frustration over the inability to get all of the Epstein documents out into the public domain.
First of all, Inherent Contempt, just great movie. Joaquin Phoenix, one of his finest roles out there. I have a hard time assessing overall what it means. I have some... I feel like we're going to have the Epstein files as a live political issue for at least the next 10 years. And the majority of the hubbub around it, including sometimes from Thomas Massie, who I respect, and I'm glad that he's in office, and Ro Khanna, who I agree with 5% of the time, but it's a robust 5%. They will say things that strike me as kind of crazy. They'll just talk about a huge multitude of victims, which we don't know actually exist. They seem to be very confident about the level of that. You have, on one hand, a government that clearly wants to cover its ass because that's what government does, that is clearly dragging its feet. Also, see government on a case that has been overpromised by a lot of the type of aforementioned populists who love to be outside of government talking about grand conspiracies. Then when they get in government and they have a position to say something about it, they're like, I want to go out of government again because that was more fun back then, like Dan Bongino, literally. It's interesting that this became the first real issue that Republicans were allowed to oppose Donald Trump on. The fervor on the populist base was stronger than the affection for the president, and he had to cave underneath that. I kind of appreciate it as a crowbar to kind of to jimmy open. Catherine, fill in the blank of my mixed metaphor where I was.
No, you're doing okay so far.
That's what crowbars are for.
That's why I felt
to
weird.
Jimmy open the safe that contains the Epstein files. That's fine. There we go. You did it.
But I don't know what inherent contempt means. It sounds like BS to me.
It's just a majority vote of Congress. They basically say, we don't like you, and maybe there's going to be some legal consequences. In the case of Bondi, it's a daily fine is what
we do that at Reason's offices sometimes too, actually. We just take votes and we hold people in inherent contempt.
I would close by this jumble by saying the New York Times had a pretty good piece a couple of days ago talking about the finances of Jeffrey Epstein, which I think have always been more of a genuine puzzle than kind of all of the hand-waving, almost purely theoretical ideas about what the actual, alleged pedophile conspiracy is. The few people out there who seem to be dedicated towards looking towards the truth of this are just heavily outnumbered by people in the political system. That includes, again, Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, who are in their exertions that I otherwise support, are kind of playing into the idea that this thing is much larger than it ever possibly could be.
Also, shout out to Reason's Matthew Petty, who continues to really just in a very charming way, just like scrounge around anytime a new batch of stuff comes out, often stuff that other people are neglecting because it's not a picture of Bill Clinton, and finding neat little stories in there about his plans to invest in surveillance tech and his collaboration with a variety of unsavory potentates and heads of state, including a piece last week about his plans to turn his island into a resort for paying customers, which, it's not the thing that's grabbing the headlines. Nobody's in a hot tub with Bill Clinton in this story, but it is if we're going to make all of our politics about this guy, we should try to understand better what was actually going on with him.
Being in a hot tub with Bill Clinton would have been one of the attractions, though.
It was. Actually, it was in the brochure. It was in the brochure, yes. Yeah.
And we don't even know who was in the hot tub with Bill Clinton because all the other faces are redacted because they're like blacked out, right? We don't even know there's no context to any of this. There's no evidence for any specific thing. There's just an awful lot of material and also a lot of conjecture and speculation about what it might mean or what might have happened. And I don't know, maybe some of it is true, but we definitely don't have any of the evidence that is needed to back up any of the kind of worst, most crazy, salacious conjecture here, right? This is a story that has remained, as Matt said, a live issue in the news, despite not really having any. It's not that there's absolutely nothing there, but there is nothing that backs up what people keep saying should be there.
If it wasn't all blacked out, maybe we would know some of that context, right? Like, the government obviously over-classifies and over-protects everything, and then that's exactly what happened here too. Like, I would bet anything that 90% of the redactions here are not necessary to protect national security. We know Winnie the Pooh was there, right? Which makes the fact that Winnie the Pooh doesn't have pants on maybe make a lot more sense. It fills up the character there.
Back up
no, you're
and
right.
explain
but we would know
that.
more of the
I
context.
don't know what you're talking about. We know Winnie the Pooh was there.
One
Bill
of the
Clinton
pictures
and Winnie
that
the
was
Pooh.
released.
I got the Bill Clinton parts. I don't know what
one of the pictures
Winnie
that was
the Pooh
released
is doing in the Epstein story.
Was a picture of Jeffrey Epstein and someone else standing next to a mascot character, a character in a mascot suit who was playing Winnie the Pooh.
I now believe everything.
Right. So obviously it's all true.
If Donald Duck shows up, we'll know for sure.
And you'll know. But the really fun thing I think that you're missing here, Peter, is that this makes powerful people squirm so much. And that's the reason why I like this Epstein story being a thing. And this is why I agree with a lot of what Matt said. I think a lot of even our fan, the people that we like that are involved in this, like Thomas Massie, are obviously I think they're out a bit too far over their skis on some of this, but man, it makes powerful people squirm, and that's just so fun. It's so fun to watch that happen, especially when those same powerful people promised that they were going to release all of this information in full, and then handed out binders to a bunch of conservative influencers at the White House, allegedly containing the Epstein files, which of course it wasn't there. And then it was
just printouts of the Wikipedia entry or something. What was in those?
And it was on my desk, but then it wasn't on my desk, but it was in these binders, but then it wasn't on my desk anymore. And then now it's all been blacked out. I don't know. I love it when people get sort of hoisted by their own petards, which is happening here, and when powerful people squirm. And so this is all fun and good. It's not hurting anybody that this continues to be a story.
I think it is, though.
Yeah.
I don't know if I think that's right. This is driving people crazy. It is driving people crazy, and it's not clear that there is anything to actually be crazy about. However, since you bring up the disclosure aspect of this, Bondi initially tried to sort of get rid of the conservative influencers with that binder earlier this year. We talked about that a little bit on the pod. I don't know, in April or something like that. But now there is this movement, right, that I mentioned with Ro Khanna and with Thomas Massie to censure her, right, to hold her in inherent contempt. And the argument that Khanna is making, Katherine, is that Bondi is explicitly violating the law. How much do you think? I don't know. Do you take that seriously? Coming from Ro Khanna, at least, he's a Democrat. He's looking for leverage. He's trying to make Trump look bad. It's not that hard, right? How seriously do we take that argument that actually Bondi is flouting the law and should be legally censured?
I think that laws that lean in the direction of transparency and disclosure are laws that we should get upset about. I think, of course, it's motivated reasoning. Of course it is. But this is actually how our politics works, right? It is adversarial, but hopefully in a way that bends toward defending people's rights because it's advantageous to do so. And I think, the total shenanigans that have gone on around transparency, not just with this, but with everything. I've got 3 emails in my inbox right now talking with lawyers about FOIAs because the government loves to not give the public information it is due by law. And so, yeah.
Wait, are we FOIAing the Epstein files?
we
The
are foiling
redactions?
all manner of stuff, Peter, because that is our job as the press. But I think that it is Khanna's job to make sure that those laws are being observed correctly. And like, I would love it if they would be more broad-based in their commitment, to that ideal instead of just in this politically advantageous way. But I will take it because I do think transparency is incredibly important. And if you are going to pay lip service to it, you should occasionally also take action if you happen to be a holder of political power.
All right. Speaking of observing the laws, let's talk a little bit about the United States and the rest of the world. Once again, the United States launched strikes in Syria against the Islamic State last week. And we're also seizing some oil tankers just for funsies. I guess maybe more than one of them. Katherine, I want you to talk to us a little bit about the tanker seizures. Think about this in the context of tariffs, because Trump loves tariffs because they provide tariff revenue. It's becoming kind of increasingly clear to me that the way he thinks about tariffs is actually a lot like the way that he thinks about his own business as Donald Trump. And his business was fundamentally, he's bitched himself as a real estate developer, but what he really was he licensed the Trump name, especially for the last 20, 25 years before he became president. And it was just licensing fees. And I think Trump kind of thinks of tariffs like American licensing fees, right? Like it's a fee to do business with the United States. And it seems like these tanker seizures are stemming from the same impulse, which is, hey, this is a way to kind of grab their stuff, to get, if not their money, then to get their oil, right? And then we can do what we want with it because that's how Trump thinks. Am I crazy to view this as a kind of an extension of Donald Trump's Trump-branded hotels and golf courses strategy?
I guess my first impulse isn't to see it exactly that way, but it is to see it as an extension of his tariff strategy in a different way, which is sanctions are also tariffs. In the sense that they are, ultimately just raising the price of moving goods across borders to 100%, right? To potentially death. And some of the justification for the tanker seizures that happened this weekend was kind of in a hand-wavy way sanctions, because one of them had an Iranian. The flag was Iranian, or I guess maybe the ship itself, the Bella One, had been previously named in a sanctions case, and so it's just a great example of when we say sanctions are not a good way to cause political change, and in fact can have all kinds of negative ramifications, just like other trade barriers and also just like other modes of warfare. This is that. On display. The fact that there also seems to have been a high-speed chase on the Atlantic because these
I'm not sure it was
ships
actually
now,
that high speed.
It's
You've
a
heard
boat,
this thing
so
about
I don't
big
really
boats.
understand.
Big
I don't
boats
know
are
how
hard
fast
to
a
turn.
knot is. Okay, so I don't know. But the idea that when you see a U.S. aircraft in the distance or a U.S. ship on the horizon, you're now like, oh no, am I going to die? That's bad. That's a bad global order that we have created. And Trump started from a place where seeing a U.S. flagged vessel of any kind was not scary. Basically, around the world. Some horrible exceptions, including people getting drone struck in Afghanistan. But in general, we sort of kind of still held some ground as the good guys, or at least the rule following guys. This takes a huge dent out of that. And I think it's truly a terrible development.
Eric, so there have been a bunch of justifications for this, some, made explicitly, some made indirectly, kind of behind the scenes. And in fact, the New York Times reported over the weekend that White House officials are not saying on the record, but when you talk to them on background, what they say is the goal of these seizures, along with a bunch of other stuff we're doing with the boat strikes and whatever, is actually just to remove Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. This seems kind of indirect. On the other hand, if you think about what Trump has done with foreign policy over the past year, we were critical of the strike in Iran, and it seems to have so far, there has not been a big backlash. That's a so far, to be clear. There's a lot of time for there to be backlash, but it has kind of worked.
Well, I'm somewhat confused by the logic that the White House is deploying here, as you just described it, Peter, because it sounds to me like they're trying to usher in a golden age in Venezuela, right? If we cut off trade we get richer and wealthier. That's the White House's argument, isn't it? Except no, in this case, we cut off trade to hurt the people in the country that were doing the trade. So I don't know.
The Venezuelan manufacturing sector is going to be so strong.
They're going to do so great now.
Oh my God!
Man, it's going to be wonderful.
Doing this,
they won't
just
export
remember,
any of their oil
we're also
anymore.
doing this to cut off the flow of fentanyl while we are descheduling marijuana, because drugs are good except when they're bad.
I mean, like, jokes aside, I think the hypocrisy here does actually matter. I think there's also a bunch of hypocrisy when it's like we're doing these boat strikes where we're like killing low-level, maybe drug runners, maybe fishermen in the Caribbean, but we can stop and seize an oil tanker. Well, then, I don't know, couldn't you stop and seize the Zodiac raft that had maybe a pound of like a couple kilos of cocaine on it or whatever? So there's, you can't think too much about this, because as soon as you spend any time thinking about it, you realize that the Trump administration's kind of just making it up as they go. I basically agree that it seems like this is a strategy to get rid of Maduro. It seems like this is an attempt to put more pressure on him. Whether that'll succeed or not, I have no idea. But it does. I think it should make people question some of the other things the Trump administration is also doing, because it just doesn't line up.
I really appreciate that you paused to translate your cocaine into metric.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, cocaine.
You're like, cocaine is not in pounds, and let's not get it twisted, okay?
Matt, speaking of other things that the White House is doing, just before the pod, I was looking at a White House statement on launching strikes against Syria. And the thing about this statement is that it was a statement by Barack Obama in 2014. And you know what? We just launched strikes against the Islamic State in Syria again this last week. It's sort of like, is this gonna be the other live issue along with the Epstein files that just keeps going forever? It's like it's gonna be 2037 and the Medicare trust fund is gonna be running out. We're also gonna be striking Syria and talking about the Epstein files.
I don't think that Syria is going to be as live an issue in 2037 as Venezuela is. There's a big difference between trying to get regime change, albeit on the cheap, compared to Iraq, and then doing what Pete Hegseth said. This isn't a declaration of war; it's a declaration of vengeance, because they killed a couple of American service people, which is itself not funny at all, nor is necessarily the vengeance. But the nomenclature, I kind of get it. I see it's definitely in the Trump MO. You recall that he did this, I believe, in 2017 when he sort of lobbed some missiles at an airfield in Syria. And I'm sure that there was a lot of requisite freak outery on this podcast and elsewhere. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter all of that much. I don't understand, probably because I'm ignorant and naive, why there are 1,000 U.S. servicemen and women in Syria. It seems to me that we don't own Syria, and we're not at war with Syria. And in fact, we're trying to sort of cooperate with the new government there. So this sort of leftover feeling of America being kind of this hegemonic force and presence in the Middle East, which, the new national security strategy says we're going to do that less now in the Middle East than we used to. We just want to make sure that no one else does it more, which is kind of a somewhat incoherent, but at least it's kind of trending in a certain direction. So it's going to be low-level stuff until we get those 1,000 people out, if we ever do. I would just like to see us get those 1,000 people out. I think that it's too easy for the United States, under any administration, under any directionality of that administration, just to say, you know what, well, let's just have a couple of hundred here, a couple thousand there. And pretty soon there's like 1,000 different places in the globe where that is the case. That seems to be inconsistent with the idea that we are no longer the unipower, that we're just one of many operating in our spheres of influence.
Can we talk about the absolute dedication to fanciful naming conventions that the Department of Defense and really like American law enforcement generally at this point?
War, Catherine.
Right.
Yeah.
So first of all, we've got the Department of War. We've got the Declaration of Vengeance.
No, it's the Department of Vengeance.
And also, my belief, although I'm not sure this is true, is that this kind of accelerated. It didn't start, but it kind of accelerated right around the time of the Iraq War. we just started naming all the operations like Operation Thunderballs and like Operation Swooping Dog and things like that. And then it's just like spread outward.
Yoga positions.
Thunderballs.
If you go to a yoga class and they tell you to get into Thunderball position, you should leave. Yep. It's not a safe yoga environment. But there is something about the kind of self-mythologizing and this like notion of the kind of very, very grand stakes. And, and this happens in law enforcement too. Liz Nolan Brown is always reporting on these like what are basically vice stings, and they all have names that are like Screaming Eagle and things like that. And it's
Thunderballs would work actually.
Operation Choke Point, which is like the craziest possible thing to call a sex trafficking sting. Anyway, all of that is simply by way of saying I do think that, though it's kind of funny to say like it's a declaration of vengeance or whatever, like that is so much in the ethos of how the DOD and maybe the administration generally thinks about these things. And it's that like the technicalities don't matter. Like the rules about who can declare what kind of aggression where are non-binding. And what kind of operation is this? Is it a war? Well, we should probably call it that if it is. And people are like, I'm just going to call it super duper smash day or whatever. And then the Constitution can't get me.
It's government by meme. I mean, that's all it is, right? That has been Trump's MO. That's been the entire Trump administration MO since 2015 is right. I mean, we didn't have a Trump administration, but that has been the Trump orbit's MO since he stepped down that escalator is government by meme. Will this play well with the meme lords, with the edge lords, right? Like, that's the question they ask. And then that's who gets elevated within the administration. And you see that all over. You see it with Pete Hegseth. You see it with Kash Patel. You see it with Pam Bondi. You see it, with the attempt to put Matt Gaetz in the AG role. Like, I mean, just constantly throughout the Trump administration. And he spends all of his day, as far as we can tell, watching Fox News, often with the sound off, so he can just tell if people look good on television, because that's what he cares about. And so if it looks good on television, if it makes a good meme, we're going to call it Thunderballs, and we're going to do it. Constitution be damned. That's how we get government right now. It's great. Speaking of which, we're going to move on here. Next up, listener question about Christmas and communism. Happy holidays, folks. Hey, Reason listeners. Do you want to help a student think clearly in the age of AI? Reliance College invites students aged 16 to 24 to the Great Connections Weekend Seminar, Reason and Power. It's going to be held from January 9th through 11th in 2026 at the Hilton Houston Plaza Medical Center. This immersive 3-day experience builds the skills no algorithm can replace: clear reasoning, persuasive communication, and independent thought. Students explore great works by Ayn Rand, Epictetus, Machiavelli, and more. Sessions are held in small, dynamic groups. You can develop the habits of mind that drive real innovation. This is not a lecture. It is a conversation, and it changes how you think. Registration is just $99.99 with scholarships available. You can learn more and apply at reliancecollege.org/seminar. That's reliancecollege.org/seminar. All right, a reminder, we really like to answer your questions. You can ask us about politics, about policy, about libertarian philosophy and history, but also about science fiction, video games, rock music, parenting, beverage choices, anything you can think of. Send in your question, but you got to email us. And the email address you got to send it to is podcasts@reason.com. Please remember to keep your questions short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long when you email us at podcasts@reason.com. This week's listener question comes from Dustin. He writes, do you agree with the following? We're all communists, maybe not, in our immediate family. Hopefully we have a community that's maybe church, neighborhood, extended family, where we're all socialist, and then we can be capitalist with everybody else. Does Christmas just expand our socialist bubble a little further when we want to give away stuff to people further away from our inner circle? Katherine, are you a communist in your personal life and at Christmas?
This question is adorable, but it concedes too much to the communists and the socialists, and I shan't have it. We are a community. The word you're looking for is a community. And the communists don't get community. Community is a voluntary association of people who are in no way, shape, or form engaging in political action in their most ideal configuration. My family does not do from each according to his ability, each according to his need. That's for darn sure. Maybe it would be better if we were a little more like that some
Did you
days.
just throw Dan under the bus? That's what I was hearing.
I was actually thinking about my children, if I'm being honest, but that's, they're a little older now. It's time for them to have some abilities and not just some needs. And there's just, I think similarly, the notion of kind of redistribution again. When you use the word socialism, it's forcible redistribution. And that's not the same thing as charity. That's not the same thing as, again, kind of the broader circle of your neighborhood, your people, your community at large. So I get it. Your metaphor is coherent, unlike Matt Welch's usually are. But also, I'm not going to give this one to the commies, and you can't make me.
I think that's a really good point, the way you talk about community, but I would also just sort of take it a little bit further to talk about private association in the Tocquevillian sense. I mean, this is one of the great things about America is we are great at private associations, clubs, chapters, interest organizations, whatever they are. It's often charity groups, often sort of social services, right, that are done at a private level, right, and that people just kind of band together to get stuff done. This is part of the American character. It's been part of the American character for 249 years, and it still is. And I mean, frankly, just like you can see this in the numbers when you look at private charity donations in the United States versus the rest of the Western world, Europe in particular, we just wildly outstrip them. Like they just give so much more money to all sorts of charities. Now, a big part of that is churches, but it's not all churches. There's also things like Reason Magazine and Reason Foundation, a 501c3 that you can donate your money to, and all of these other types of organizations, right, that just sort of exist to do stuff in the private realm without government. And that's not communism. That's actually the market at work, and the market makes room for all of those types of private associations that are maybe not corporations, that don't maybe have kind of direct kind of financial market transactions, but do have a kind of private networks of people banding together to get stuff done. That's the American way. That's the market way. And it's a good way. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I think largely I agree with Katherine. I think it's just sort of a bad analogy. Sorry, Dustin. Thank you for the note. I hope you still like us. Yeah, socialism is about, and capitalism for that matter, are both about like the ordering of political and economic systems. I don't think it really applies to a family. I think it's the wrong way to think about families or these voluntary communication organizations. In my own household, my cat, shout out Stegosaurus, is the socialist, I suppose. But like even then, there's no mechanism that enforces, my redistribution of wealth into her bowl of kitty litter or whatever. I wanted to think about this though through the lens kitty kibble. I should have said. I'm now worried about Stegosaurus.
Yeah.
I want to think about this in the frame of Christmas though. Sorry, can't talk now. And I thought about. I think that the error that's being made here is the same error that a lot of people make when they read A Christmas Carol. Which I love, and so you're going to listen to me talk about A Christmas Carol for a minute. The lazy interpretation of A Christmas Carol is that Scrooge is this greedy capitalist and he has to learn to be more of a socialist. He has to learn to share his wealth, right? And it's actually kind of the exact opposite. Like early in the story, you might remember there's those two people who come to his office and they say like, will you give some money to help the poor? And he has that famous line about like, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Well, I was worried for a second. Maybe they'd gone away. If there's poor people, they should go there. Like Scrooge is a socialist. He pays taxes to support these institutions, this basic welfare system that existed 200 years ago in England. And he thinks that's enough and that he can just keep the rest of his money. And later, like the responsibility is on the state, not on him to take care of people. And then later, the Ghost of Christmas Present mocks him with those same words, right? Like when he's looking at the Cratchit household and he sees how poor they are, and the ghost is like, oh, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? The lesson of A Christmas Carol is that Scrooge is a bad capitalist because like he thinks the existence of this welfare system absolves him that responsibility. And the second lesson of A Christmas Carol is that when you give away your money, when you buy gifts for people, especially the people you love, when you spend time with the people in your family or the people you love, you actually do get something back in return. That the holidays are not, as Scrooge puts it at one point in the story, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every December the 25th. Like, there actually is a return there. There is a market there, one that he doesn't understand but comes to understand, that there's a return on that. And so he becomes a better, more rounded, more understanding capitalist, you might say, but certainly human being. But yeah, I think there's the same sort of misinterpretation of the holidays is happening in the listener's question. Again,
Eric,
Dustin, we love you. Thank you for listening.
Eric, have you written that?
Have I written what?
That speech you just gave. Have you
I
written
wrote
that
a couple little notes here for myself. But
no, I mean, could you please write it for Reason.com after this instead of whatever you were going to do today? Because that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was
folks,
right into my veins.
This is how it works at Reason Magazine. You get a peek behind the curtain.
People should just read A Christmas Carol is what you should do. You should sit down on, it's a real short.
Do that.
Go read it. It's
People
great.
are going to read an Eric Boehm essay, or maybe watch an Eric Boehm vertical video, although I guess next year now, about this because I just assigned it to you.
Great.
The end.
Matt Welch, answer the question however you feel like, but think of a thing that I didn't say when I introduced it is that Dustin's subject line referenced Liz Wolfe. He said he wanted this question to be for Liz Wolfe. She is not with us this week. She's going to be off on leave for about the next month or so she's not available. But think a little bit about the Liz Wolfian answer to this, because it's about church and family and community and how maybe we don't have to do the markets all the time there.
I feel like I should start doing this a lot with my hands. That's for the people who are watching at home. No, I'm not going to answer how you want to, Peter Suderman.
Traditional.
I'm not Liz Wolfe. Come on now. Liz Wolfe
you
would
live in
say,
New York.
That is true. Liz Wolfe would say that it's a socialism. The church ain't socialism. We go there freely, and we choose to give money to the community, and that's nice. It's fun. It's very much reiterating what Katherine said. What raised my hackles on this is just it's always an opportunity to talk about how truly underratedly evil communism is. Communism, we seize the means of production, we hoard them, and by doing so, we impoverish the entire unit of which we are in charge of, but we enrich ourselves. We take a greater share of ourselves. So the analogy would be, I impoverish my family, but I take all the money for myself. And I also force everybody who lives with me to lie. I strangle their freedom of speech. I force them to recite the lies under punishment as a way to sort of demonstrate my power over them. There is no underrating of the pernicious evil of communism ever. It should not be analogized, although I agree with Katherine, this is an adorable and delightful question, for nothing else, to get the Christmas Carol disquisition, which is fantastic. But communism is so truly, truly profoundly evil. It warps your ideology. It's not just we decided to organize our economics this way. No, you created totalitarianism. You created an absolute police state that is a nightmare where the people who are subject to it can't escape.
Communism might be like an abusive family. When Matt was talking, I was like, actually, some families are like that. And it's bad.
Which is of course not funny. So I think Liz Wolfe would share my anathema, my
just bring Liz Wolfe in on all that.
And communism outlaws religion. So enough said. Mic drop.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to our final topic then. I feel like I need a Dr. Evil pinky finger here for this one because it's about $9 billion, which is how much Medicaid fraud prosecutors think could have been going on in Minnesota. That's like half of the state's Medicaid spending. And if you know anything about state budgets, Medicaid is usually either the top or second biggest budget item for any state. So Eric, you have a history of reporting on state policy. You also lived in Minnesota for a time. Can you just talk us through what's going on? How did this even happen?
Yeah, I did not engage in any of the welfare fraud that's alleged when I lived in Minnesota. I'll be clear. This is also all tied up. I'll get to this in a minute, but it's all tied up with the fact that there's a huge Somali community in Minnesota, right? And in the Twin Cities specifically, who are in a lot of the reporting on this is being talked about as if like every Somali in the Twin Cities was somehow involved in this welfare fraud. If you ever happen to be in the Twin Cities, by the way, the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, which is where there's a big Somali community, man, go to the Acadia Cafe. It's a great little music venue there. And the Town Hall Brewery is right up the road, right up Cedar Avenue from there. Really fantastic spots. Check those out for sure. My take on this is just like welfare fraud is bad, right? That's not novel or interesting. It seems obvious, but I guess we have to say that. Like, I'm glad that the people who are doing this seem to be getting caught and being, put on trial. And they're at this point, something like 86 defendants, I think it was. Maybe it's gone up since the time I read that. But I wish we could have systems that actually kind of stopped this fraud before it happened. That would be even nicer. It would be great if, say, the state government was actually funding these programs instead of just overseeing what is overwhelmingly federal funding, and therefore the state of Minnesota has very little to kind of actually do. They administer it. They have a lot to do with it, but they have very little incentive to actually make sure this money is spent well. I think that's a factor.
On the contrary, just to break in here, the way Medicaid is funded, it is a joint federal-state program with matching federal dollars. So the matching formula is a little bit complicated, but the short version is every time a state spends $1 on Medicaid, that calls down federal money. And so they have an incentive, not to check for fraud, not to spend well, just to spend more to get additional federal funds.
Yeah, so like obviously changing the way the Medicaid program operates would be great, not just to stop this fraud, but to stop other fraud. There was a Georgetown report that I looked up before coming on the podcast here that shows there's something like $1 trillion in Medicaid fraud over the past 10 years. So that's, this is a big amount of fraud. We don't like fraud. Medicaid fraud is bad. Welfare fraud is bad. But it's also, I think, getting kind of blown out of proportion. And unfortunately, it's getting blown out of proportion because of the Somali American immigrant population there in the Twin Cities. Something like, 91% of the 86 defendants who have been charged in the scheme, per the New York Times reporting on this, are Somali Americans, but they are American citizens, over like almost all of them in this case, either by birth or by naturalization. They're all getting lumped together with the just sort of general Somali immigrant and refugee community that's there. But this a lot is largely to blame for Chris Rufo, who helped blow up this story. And one way he's framed this is that Somalians are stealing billions of dollars from American taxpayers. I think this is just it. Again, the welfare fraud needs to be dealt with, should be dealt with. There are policy mechanisms in place you could deal with there. There are well over 100,000 Somali Americans in just the Twin Cities alone. So we're talking about, 86 people, that have been charged in this scheme. Like the way this is being used to smear an entire immigrant community and being used to actually then hurt maybe future people who are trying to come here, trying to escape unfortunate situations, whether it's in Somalia or somewhere else, I think is really unfortunate that we're kind of like rolling together what should be a welfare story and turning it into, for culture war reasons, an immigration story. That's what really kind of upsets me about the way this is being discussed.
But this happens all the time. I mean, whenever we talk about immigration, we hear from people, even people who call themselves libertarians, that we can't have immigration. We can't have a lot more immigration. We can't have a more open immigration regime because of the welfare state. And so every time we get, it's because entitlements, it's because of federal or state benefits, it's because we're spending money on poorer people. And every single time we talk about immigration, it's, the welfare state makes it impossible. But it looks to me, Matt, like, why can't we just solve the welfare fraud problem, solve the we're spending way too much money on terrible programs problem, rather than treat this as an immigration problem?
Because we don't actually want to solve the welfare problem, the waste, fraud, and abuse that we always hear about in every political campaign.
I thought we were going to fix that. We fixed that, right?
We never fixed that.
I was told we were going to
fix that. I don't think. As long
waste,
as
fraud, and abuse is like jam and Carol Channing, right? Jam tomorrow, jam yesterday, never ever jam today. Waste, fraud, and abuse tomorrow, yesterday, but never today.
I didn't realize that Carol Channing's a fan of OG British punk. I'm all in favor of it. There was a great story in Reason Magazine written by a cat named Peter Suderman more than a dozen years ago called Medicare Whack-A-Mole. Great headline. I don't know who wrote that. And the concept, if I'm remembering it correctly, is just, got that one there. And then the other guy little pops up there, because the whole purpose of the program is to get money out the door fast. Wherever the government at any level is in the business of getting money out the door fast, preferably to interest groups or to communities or whatever, who have the sobbiest of stories. So 9/11. Boy, there's a huge 9/11 fund. Jon Stewart gets up and cries on television every 18 months about the 9/11 fund. How we can make it even bigger? And I know I sound like a heartless a-hole here, and sorry. That fund absolutely is going to be used by people who are organizing themselves around to siphon as much of that money as possible. Sorry, it's just the way it happens. If we're trying to get money out the door as fast as possible, that means we are a check writing machine. And that means that there's going to be entire economies that are associated, that are organized around getting them checks. Just is like this is a kind of a bizarre example. It's not precisely welfare, but it's look, there's a money machine. What can we do? In the 90s and early aughts in Los Angeles, there was a lot of police abuse cases that were heinous and horrible. And locally, people like, hey, but we have political allies in the local government here who want to settle these cases instead of adjudicating them. So let's just sue the police department all the time and say they abused me, and we'll just get some checks out the door. The amount of money was incredible. And then they had the dash cams and the body cams, and suddenly those went down. A lot, because the free money started becoming a little bit more difficult to get. It is everywhere. If you know any private investigators, which I do, it is astonishing the amount of fraud based in. And there are, yes, immigrant communities in places like, cool, we got a new thing of how we can do slip and falls in New York City. Ice on the ground. Let's sue everybody. This is just how the system works. So we're not going to solve that unless we decide that is something that we want to solve. This goes for disability insurance and disability claims and a bunch of other things besides. So it ain't immigrants' fault. Immigrants absolutely do it. It's welfare's fault and our own political inability to recognize what we are doing with the current welfare state that we have.
So that Medicare whack-a-mole story that you mentioned was actually a part of a pair of stories. The whack-a-mole story was about payment reforms that were always promised to solve the Medicare we don't have enough money problem, and then they didn't. Right. It was just like decades and decades. If we're going to solve this by changing the scheme that we use to pay doctors, and it would something would happen after you change that scheme, and then you still wouldn't have enough money at the end. And they kept promising it. They kept changing the scheme, and it kept not working. And it was just a lesson about how technocratic reforms don't really work. But then I wrote another piece about Medicare and Medicaid fraud, which is kind of a long, complicated piece. But the two best details in it that I recall are the scammer. That was mostly about Florida Medicare fraud, because it's a lot of Medicare and Medicaid money in Florida. So that's where the heart of the scamming was at the time. But there was one guy who used his, I can't remember if it was Medicaid, his fraudulent earnings to buy a batleth. Do people know what a batleth is? Yeah, Eric's nodding his head because he watches Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is this is what you do with your Medicare fraud money, is you spend it on a Klingon curved sword replica. And that is what this sort of thing funds. It's great. But the other good detail on that was I read the GAO report on how the GAO investigated Medicare or Medicaid fraud. Can't remember which. It doesn't matter. But healthcare spending fraud. And we were like, well, we set up the account online, and we thought about trying to make this a little more complicated, but we just gave them our phone number at the GAO. And they called us, and we didn't answer. And then they were just like, okay, you can bill Medicare now. And that was it. They were just they started billing Medicare from there. That's how easy the fraud was. There's absolutely no attempt to curb any of it because, as you said, Matt, the entire goal was just to get money out the door. Katherine, I want to just sort of end with you. What are the broader lessons here? And maybe hook this to, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal piece about just the kind of expansion of federal welfare benefits beyond Minnesota, beyond this sort of specific case of welfare fraud. It was by Phil Graham and John Early last week. And I just want to read you the nut graph here because it is incredible. Even as our economy has experienced broad-based growth, real federal welfare spending has soared by 765%, more than twice as fast as total federal spending, now costs $1.4 trillion annually. That is every year. Were that money simply doled out evenly to the 19.8 million families the government defines as poor, each household would receive more than $70,000 a year. Like, this is a gigantic amount of money, and it doesn't seem like it's working.
No, it does not seem like it's working. That's sort of related to the thing that I was thinking about when Eric mentioned that most of the folks involved in the Minnesota fraud are Somali Americans. They're citizens, which took me back to the fight at TPUSA over heritage Americans and this idea of who really is or really isn't American and how American they are. You know who does all this fraud? You know who collects all these federal welfare payments? It's Americans. It's just Americans. It's not, of course, there is spending on, especially newly arrived immigrants. There are people who come here and put their kids in public schools, which is, always a debate about, well, does that count against the total of what immigrants are costing this country? But this back and forth about heritage Americans at TPUSA, Vivek Ramaswamy did this whole speech, and he thought he was so clever. He did this whole little bit about I know, shocking. He did this whole bit about the woke people. They think that things are non-binary, but we know things aren't non-binary. You either are American or you aren't. What? Okay, he's
cute.
Right, though. He's right. And so we're going to let him have it. He also, I think, in a line that hit a little better, said, if you believe these people who think to be truly American, your family has to have been on the Mayflower or whatever. By that logic, Trump is less American than Biden, and Elizabeth Warren is the most American of all. And the crowd loved that. Nothing like an Elizabeth Warren is an Indian joke to just get people going every time. But that is the logic of this argument in a way that I think is important to point out. Americans do welfare fraud. It's not about immigrants.
And to that point, just real quick, to go back to Peter's Star Wars moment from a Star Trek moment from a moment ago about the Klingon sword.
How dare? How dare?
No, but you wouldn't ever conceive of that said that this one Florida doctor bought a backlash with his welfare fraud money, and that means all Star Trek fans are welfare queens or they're welfare fraudsters, right? That's what's happening here is we're saying all Somali Americans or all immigrants are welfare, and that framing is just so disingenuous and so wrong, and people should see right through it.
Hashtag not all Star Trek fans. I think that's a pretty good transition to our final segment here, which is our cultural consumption. What have you been watching, reading, otherwise consuming in the cultural realm? Matt Welch, I hope it's Star Trek.
It's not ever Star Trek.
Hopes you're dashed.
Wait, I think I should go first because mine is about the future.
Okay, Catherine,
and
I hope it's Star Trek.
It's not. I wrote in a Waymo. I just want to talk about it again. I wrote in a Waymo when I was in Phoenix. It's so cool, you guys. I know that everyone's grumpy because this week, the power went out in San Francisco and the Waymo stopped. But also, you know what happens when the power goes out and humans are driving their cars and the streetlights are out? People get confused and they get in car accidents. The Waymos just stopped. That's all they did. That doesn't seem that bad. But meanwhile, I got to and from the airport in my little robot car. It was clean. It was quiet. It showed up right where I wanted it to be. Nobody talked to me at all. It was perfect.
It wasn't like being on a podcast.
It was perfect. I just want to give a shout out to our robot future as depicted perhaps in Star Trek.
You could do the nobody talk to me in a car driven by a human.
You literally have to pay extra for that, Matt.
You have to pay. I just glare.
That's a market.
It doesn't. I'm a lady and it doesn't work, Matt. People are out here trying to save my soul and convince me to listen to their podcasts and stuff. I hate it.
Oh, gross.
You're like, you should just make them listen to your podcast.
I would never do that to someone, Peter.
Matt Welch, she'd do that to you. She makes you listen to her podcast every week.
I do.
You assume I'm listening. So I watched, shockingly, The American Revolution. a 6-part, 12-hour miniseries on PBS by Ken Burns, who Nick Gillespie interviewed recently for Reason about that podcast. I recommend it very highly to people. It is lumpy and uneven and very good and very interesting and occasionally illuminating and occasionally like, come on, dude. It's all of that. And I think one lesson that at least I take away from it as someone who's consumed a bunch of Ken Burns, bored a lot of people here with that, and also consumed a whole bunch of Revolutionary War era content over the last year and a half, is that, Ken Burns doesn't get to be the final statement on all this kind of stuff. I think people invest so much in him because he gets Peter Coyote to have the grave voice, and he gets Tom Hanks on to do the voiceovers. And, these are big and theatrical kind of judgments or depictions. The Revolutionary War is too big for all of that. And one thing about the series that I really liked is that it kind of reflects some of the historiography that's been going on with the Revolutionary War, which is to say there's a lot of people, a lot of factions who have a lot of conflicts within those factions. And it's kind of messy, and at some points it's kind of random, and that's fine. That's part of the wonderful complications of history. Conservatives got really upset about it because really, from the opening jump, there's a juxtaposition of the Iroquois Federation and Benjamin Franklin saying a thing, and everyone thought that this meant that Ken Burns was saying X, Y, and Z. I think Nick was kind of correct in positing that this is. Not by objective sort of declaration, but by demonstration, sort of a repudiation of the 1619 Project view of history of America just being all about the original sin of slavery. There's a lot of sin in here. And the slavery question is very divided and interesting and really worthwhile for Americans to know in the Revolutionary War. George Washington, they actually didn't really even dwell on that too much in this series, but George Washington vis-a-vis slaves was pretty awful during the revolution, not just in terms of his own, but in how that affected policy, particularly towards the end of it. But there are moments in there that it embraced the idea, or at least it addressed the idea of how this is very much a civil war. It was a world war in ways that we don't really emphasize a lot, and it was a civil war in ways that we don't emphasize a lot, and that's very interesting too. There was at least a couple of moments when I just found myself gasping at new knowledge that was kind of horrific. One was, for me, was the brutality of the Southern campaign in the Civil War type way of neighbor against neighbor, and then the absolute despicable brutality of Washington towards the Indians in the Native Americans in New York. Awful, blood-curdling stuff, all of which is great. It's part of the complications of the American Revolutionary War, and it should be an invitation, or I would recommend using it as an invitation to go explore other kinds of corners of what is a really just fascinating and ultimately, for me, very fun story. So check it out, American Revolution. It ain't perfect, and sometimes you go, oh, wait a second. Then they did the Declaration of Independence and all that. That's awesome. It almost comes as a surprise, but it's still a worthwhile exercise and will get you pumped up for the semi-quincentennial. The end.
Check it out, The American Revolution. I feel like we're doing that every day of our lives here.
That's right, man.
It's kind of what we're living through, is 249 years of that. So I saw Avatar Fire and Ash. This is the third Avatar film, James Cameron's sci-fi saga. Right? It feels a little bit like the last one, which was The Way of Water. The good news is I really liked the last one, The Way of Water. It was just kind of incredible. There's big battle whales that take down the mean whaling guys. There's a really mean, stupid corporation. I mean, this movie's politics are just exactly the opposite of mine. It is a kind of eco-action, eco-revenge film, right? This is the Department of Vengeance as imagined by James Cameron, except against the military and the big corporations. And it's like some sort of Gaia Earth Mother situation in which you've got the big blue aliens on the living planet with a spirit god that you can plug into. I mean, not really making this up at all, right? And they're all just taking out the big corporations, which are the military, and the same thing. And this is
Does the plot still hinge around unobtainium?
So they switched for the two sequels. It used to hinge around unobtainium, and now it hinges around another substance that they only name like twice and has some word.
Because they were very embarrassed about the unobtainium thing
inside the whales that maybe gives you kind of eternal life. But they got to kill the whales to get it.
It's just a
ambergris.
And they got to kill the whales to get it. And the whales are intelligent. And in this movie, they wear clothes. They wear cool, giant, like nose ring, earring situations. One of them wears a cape while they're doing the whales. The whales are 4 times bigger than any whale on planet Earth.
You know what? I don't want to know.
It's these giant whales. And then these peaceful whales.
The amazing thing is this will make $2 billion, this movie.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, this movie's probably going to make a little less than the last one, but that's merely to say that it's going to make a whole hell of a lot of money. And it's because these movies are, in fact, kind of awesome big screen spectacles. And I do not agree with this movie's politics at all. Normally when I see what are effectively like a Greenpeace propaganda movies, I'm like, ugh, no. And in this case, I just kind of love it because James Cameron is so utterly fucking committed. He's committed to delivering awesome at every single moment. And the movies look amazing and the action scenes are just... They go on. I mean, this movie's 3 hours and 15 minutes, and there's like 40 minutes into the movie, you just get like a 45-minute action sequence in which there is like a bunch of traders on a flying jellyfish in a caravan, and they get attacked by evil blue Navi alien guys. It's just like, and then everything goes crazy haywire from there. And it's just like, it just keeps going and keeps happening. It's like a Peter Suderman movie review at the end of a podcast, and I loved every bit of it. I can't recommend these movies enough because James Cameron is like one of 4 guys left in Hollywood who's still trying. And you see that in every one of these frames, even though it's kind of a rehash. Maybe it should have been called Fire and Rehash rather than Fire and Ash. Like, no. It's just so good. It's so good and so enjoyable to sit there in someone else's incredible, ridiculous imagination for 3.5 hours. Eric, take us home.
Listening to Matt talk about the American Revolution, that reminded me of Dan Hannan. I think everybody at Reason's favorite Scottish member of Parliament, who refers to the American Revolution somewhat hilariously as the second Anglosphere Civil War. Matt, I don't know if you've ever heard him say that, but I figured you'd appreciate that.
I just figured it would be kind of like the unfortunate events.
The second Anglosphere Civil War.
He's objectively pro-American side, which I...
Yeah, right. No, and he is. And yet that is his view from that side of the pond. I went to see John Mulaney's new stand-up show. He was here in D.C. at the Anthem, and the show, I believe, is called Mr. Whatever. I assume this will be out on Netflix or YouTube or somewhere eventually, but he's going to be on tour, as he said at the end of the show, forever. So you can probably go see it in person. Go see live events, like live music, live comedy. This stuff's all great. And it's basically like he wrote this show for me, like personally. So I really appreciate that, John Mulaney. If you're listening, thank you very much. He opened by doing like a 5-minute riff on how fake and terrible the wharf is in D.C. And if you live in D.C., you will appreciate how fake and terrible the wharf is. I don't like going there. I don't particularly like going to the Anthem, but I did for this. He did a long bit about how old people are ruining politics and ruining culture, and how we need to take like stuff away from old people to teach them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That was all quite funny. And another long section about how energy efficient appliances are ruining his life because it takes 4 hours for his pants to get dry, and they won't get dry now either. So yes, this is all kind of low-hanging fruit. I don't think anything here, any of the jokes landed quite as well or hit quite as hard as like, there's a horse loose in the hospital, which is just still the perfect like summary of the political culture of the Trump years. And some of his other early stuff is all very, very funny, but this was all good. It was all very good. I laughed quite a lot. His delivery is still fantastic, even when he is kind of hitting the low-hanging fruit for jokes. And anyway, it's a great show. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Andrea Jin, who was one of the openers. She did maybe the best bit of the whole night. Was this whole long extended story about taking her grandparents, who grew up in communist China, to a Costco in America. And it was amazing. Again, like she wrote the bit for me or for Scott Lincecum, maybe. I don't know. But I don't want to ruin any of it. But
noted
you should. Or
commie hater Matt Welch.
incredible. It ends with her and her grandfather debating whether a giant bag of rice or her grandmother should be the last thing to get back in the car because there's only room for one of them in the car at the end of the Costco trip. Hilarious bit, really. I wouldn't want to ruin any more of the joke, but look it up on YouTube if you could find it, or better yet, go see her, Andrea Jin, somewhere in person. She's opening right now for John Mulaney. They're both great.
Who was it? Which Russian official was it who came to the United States and saw
Yeltsin.
a normal grocery store and was just like, this can't be real?
It's Yeltsin. Come on.
Yeah,
Yeltsin.
Boris Yeltsin, yeah.
And it was specifically the Freezy Pops section where he was just like, no, you know, look at the colors.
There's so many
There's so
pops,
many.
and they're so freezy. America.
It's great. Red, white, and blue Freezy Pops. 249 years, man. Pretty good. All right, folks, that is our show. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That is reason.com/donate. Thank you all so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return.